you can actually accurately say something with your words that exactly corresponds to things in reality. And we can say a lot of things and draw a lot of correspondences, but there's always this fragility, both of language and of human knowledge, that should invite us to kind of have a humble posture before people and things. And I think metaphors help us do that.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Joy Clarkson is the author of Aggressively Happy and host of the podcast Speaking with Joy. She's the books editor for Plough Quarterly and a research associate in theology and literature at King's College London. Joy completed her PhD in theology at the University of St. Andrews, where she researched how art can be a resource of hope and consolation. Her new book is You Are a Tree and Other Metaphors to Nourish Life, Thought, and Prayer. In this episode, Joy and I talk about the ways that figurative language shapes the way we think about the world and ourselves. And Joy tries to convince me that the distinction between simile and metaphor is meaningful. Joy Clarkson, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast. Thanks for being here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. Oh, yeah. Sorry, cut you off.
The title of your new book is You're a Tree. It's an odd statement. What does it mean?
Well, I draw it from Psalm 1. So I draw my authority from Scripture and say that I can be confident in doing that. It is a book about metaphors and about how the metaphors we use shape the way that we live. And I picked that metaphor specifically because it's one of the most rooted in Scripture. It's everywhere you look. But also because I think it's a helpful kind of response to the ways that we often find ourselves describing things in the world and ourselves right now, which is that we tend to use metaphors of computers and machines and money, whether or not we realize it. And I think those can be exhausting, but also just inappropriate to the depth of human experience. So I think the metaphor of you are a tree, which is given to us by Scripture and many poets ever since, is a fitting and provocative response to our kind of technologized world.
Yeah. Your point, is well taken, that the language of metaphor is not just, it's not decorative, it's not an ornament to thought, it shapes our thought. And you suggest that, I think you can tell me if I'm, this is a fair thing to say. You are suggesting that the dominant metaphor that we use to think about our own mental processes, in many ways, our own life, is that of the computer, that I'm a meat computer. And I was trying to think of another possible, what would be maybe the second, what's the next most used metaphor for human beings besides machinery? And I couldn't come up with anything in terms of what we actually gets used in everyday life. You are making the case, aren't you, that the computer or the machine is the dominant metaphor for the way people talk about human beings in our Western world. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'll be pedantic. Having finished a PhD a couple years ago, you want to make sure that every claim you make, you can absolutely, completely follow up. And since
you'll get over it, by the way.
Good. I hear that it softens with age, and you get more confident again. No, I suppose I can't audit all the language of the modern age and 100% say that it's the machine. But I do think it's one of the most prevalent, if not the most prevalent. And I think it makes sense that it is, right? Because one of the things I talk about is metaphors are kind of the things we reach for, whether consciously or unconsciously, to describe things that are difficult to put into words. So we reach for things in our experience. And, as you and I are doing this podcast, I like to think we're both probably pretty literary, incarnational people, but we're doing it through, I'm looking at you on a screen, I'm talking into my little blue Yeti microphone, I'm using my AirPods. And so we're just surrounded by machines. And so that, I think, has become more the language you use because it is a lot of the imagery that we are offered in our everyday life. So yes, with a softened footnote version of not wanting to say I know everything about the modern language. Yes, I think that is one of the kind of operative metaphors that we reach for when we're describing both humans and other things too, I think.
All right. And nobody really says I'm a computer, or I'm a meat computer, or anything like that. I don't know people who say I am a computer, but work that out a little bit. When you say we use that metaphor, could you kind of work that idea out a little bit?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is I'm kind of talking about it in the sense of what there's a book called Metaphors We Live By, which was a big splash a few years ago. And they talk about neuroscientists talk about kind of operative metaphors. So they're metaphors that we don't have in the front of our mind, but they are kind of operating behind the scenes as an overarching image for some things that we draw on it all the time. So I may not say I'm a machine, but I may say to you that I want to update you on what's happened in my life. I may say that I need to take some time off this weekend and recharge. I may say that this is more of a machine one, but that it's taking me a while to adjust, right? That's a word we use for cars, for something that needs to be tweaked, something that's metallic. And then even the ways we describe things like productivity. That word, right? Productivity is to produce something. It doesn't bring to mind a tree that's bearing fruit. It brings to mind an assembly line, right? So we have this kind of image of productivity, of being swift, of being able to do the same thing over and over again with great rapidity. So those are kind of some ways, some easy ones that you reach for. But I think those are some ways in which the language of how we expect machines to act, to update, to adjust, to produce, we use those words to talk about ourselves. And I think something that is interesting about that is that we used to do the opposite thing. So the word, I talk about this in the book, but the word computer used to be a word that described a human being. So a computer was someone who computed. It was either somebody who sat with little buttons doing the thing, or before that, I think it was used back in like the 1600s to describe someone who did math computations. And so originally, when we described a machine as a computer, we were kind of applying human terms to a machine.
Sure.
And now we've kind of moved, because it's so around us all the time, we've moved from using technological language to describe humans.
Yeah.
So that
each of those words that you were listing there, I thought, a lot of those update probably didn't. I think update goes back farther than computers. Probably, I'm not sure, but one suspects that was applied to computers, and now we think of it as a computer word, and or icon. That's which is just kind of the way language works, right? I mean, the word ardent used to just mean on fire, and I think it was Shakespeare who first used ardent to mean my heart's on fire, and but now you think somebody was a lunatic. They say, call the fire department. My house is ardent, but I really appreciate the way you talk about to think of ourselves as computers or as machines is both incomplete and unforgiving. Can you work out that idea? What's unforgiving about that metaphor?
I think that what I meant by that is, so I think about my own machines, my own computers, right? And I have expectations of my computer. I expect that it will work the same way every day. I don't have a personal relationship with my computer. I largely kind of just appreciate it as something
Good for you.
That's meant
to. Some people do.
It's a tool that I can use. I expect the same thing every day. And to be honest, if it broke, if it was no longer functional, I would not have a great deal of sentimentality about getting a new one, right? I would kind of feel sentimental I did feel sentimental when I replaced my college computer quite a few years ago now. But there's this sense that it's replaceable, right? So it's replaceable. It's made for a function, and acts the same way every day. And I think those are expectations we put on ourselves, right? So
Right.
I expect myself to be able to be productive in the same way every single day, right? If you're a writer, this is a podcast about writing. You want to be the kind of writer, and maybe you are, but who diligently does their 500 words a day and it always comes out, and and you just do it. But I don't find that that's possible. There are some days where I can miraculously produce 2,500 words. And there are some days where I fuss over a sentence, or I write 3 paragraphs and I hate it all. And actually, that's not a drawback. That's actually just a part of writing. And actually, it's a part of what makes writing interesting and better, and being able to sit with things and marinate with things and work over things over and over again. So if I expect myself to be like a computer and, as the metaphor goes, crank things out, then I'll both make worse art, worse words, but I'll also feel guilty. I'll feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm imposing that kind of inappropriate metaphor onto myself. And then also that comes with the sense that if I'm also regarding myself as a tool of production, right? If I'm just worthy because of what I can produce, then that's also unforgiving, because then if I don't produce, then I better get nervous because I might get thrown out like that laptop, But that's what I meant by it's unforgiving. We kind of unconsciously carry over the properties of a computer to ourselves, and it can be quite crushing.
Yeah. And if you internalize the idea that the human mind is a computer, is a kind of computer, unconsciously. If that's running in the background, here we go with another computer image. Insofar as I'm not like a computer, I'm feeling like I'm not sufficiently human, or I'm not sufficiently, I'm not doing a good job of being a person, or a creative person, or a thinker, and I wonder, there's a sentence you have that I love. It says, "We can clot blood, write poetry, form romantic attachments, and cook spaghetti bolognese, all while being, according to human standards, fairly stupid. The ways in which we fail to be a computer fall close to humankind's greatest strengths: loyalty, resilience, intuition, creativity." I think that's really smart and really helpful to remember that the great things about us are the things that are least computerish.
I'll throw in a poem there that a great deal of our value is, just as E. Cummings puts it, being a human merely being.
Yes, so good. So at one point you say that metaphor is the fruit of attention. And that's not the meaning of that is not self-evident, so we might need some help on that. And at the same time requires closer attention so that we're not deceived or confused by metaphor. Metaphor is the fruit of attention. Tell me about that.
So I guess maybe I could put a qualifier in there of good metaphors are the fruit of attention. Although I think in general, to some degree, they are all the fruit of attention.
Right.
So,
even if we're paying attention the wrong way, we make metaphors. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so I think of a metaphor that I really love in a poem by Seamus Heaney called "Digging," and he thinks about "You're nodding like you know it," and love it too. It's he thinks about his father digging in the garden and all the different kind of facets of that in a very earthy, specific way. And then he sees that as kind of his father's vocation, and then he uses it as a metaphor to think about his own vocation as a writer. And the poem is beautiful. It's a beautiful poem for writers, but also for gardeners. And he's able to draw out aspects of being a writer that you might not notice otherwise, because he's paying attention to his father gardening. And he maybe wouldn't be able to speak as eloquently or as truly about aspects of what it is to be a writer, and to think and to imagine and to put pen to paper, if he hadn't paid attention to that kind of moment of his father being in the garden and what that was like and what it disclosed. And I guess just the principle to me behind that is that metaphors are using these kind of tangible, touchable things in the world to speak about. They're giving us language about things that are often intangible. And that kind of comes with this this underlying faith that our experiences in the world can disclose things about God and ourselves and about reality. And that the closer we pay attention and the more careful and experimental and joyful we are with our words, the more we can discover things. So that's what I think I meant by metaphor is the fruit of attention. And we often do it, not as carefully as Seamus Heaney, because, all the metaphors about computers come to us probably just from our experience of computers, our attention to them in a more distracted way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about, and this may get us into the next part of the same sentence that you wrote, that metaphor requires close attention so that we're not deceived or confused. When I think about Seamus Heaney looking at his father digging and thinking about how that is like his own vocation as a writer, that's really helpful. The ways he talks about the pen as his shovel, and he's digging for something the way his father's digging, and that's so helpful. And then on the other hand, I think it's important that the writer, since we're talking about writing and digging in a garden as a metaphor for writing, there are things about digging in a garden that aren't like writing, right? I can wake up any morning I want, unless I have sciatica. I can wake up in the morning and dig. And you just said we can't wake up every morning. There are things that keep me from writing that aren't necessarily that I'm a failure. I often try to think of myself, if my job is writing, a plumber's job is plumbing, and the plumber never wakes up and says, I've got plumber's block, so I can't go to work. And in some ways, I find it helpful to say, hey, this is just my work. I sit down and I do what I do. But on the other hand, that writing and plumbing are different from one another in some significant ways that can lead to me beating up on myself, because when I say plumbers don't have plumber's block, that's not as helpful as at one time I thought it was, let's say.
Yeah.
And as you make the point that the whole point of a metaphor is, here are these two things that you thought weren't alike. They're alike in certain ways. There's this overlap of the Venn diagram that gives us insight into the less familiar things, but that doesn't mean that there's still things that don't overlap in the Venn diagram. And we, any thoughts on a way? Well, you've already talked about with the computer metaphor. There certainly are some helpful overlaps between thinking about the human mind and a computer. And you've already talked about, you better be sure you understand where it doesn't overlap, or that's not just an unhelpful metaphor, it's a harmful metaphor.
Yeah. And I think what I want to say about that too, so, I kind of have this playful thing in the book where all the chapter titles are metaphors. So it's people are trees and wisdom is light. But I have in parentheses in each one of those, people are not trees, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, I think part of the help of metaphor, right, is that it draws our attention to the things in the Venn diagram. But then because it is not the thing in the Venn diagram, it kind of then jettisons us back out to then pay attention to different aspects of it. So even using metaphors kind of invites us to pay more attention. And I think one of the reasons that is helpful, and why keeping the kind of bracketed knot in view is helpful, is that, to put it in the language of John Calvin, the human heart is an idol factory, right? It creates things to worship, but I think that in a different way, it also creates this sense that we know something and that we have ownership over that knowledge. So we might think that we know what love is, or we know what truth is, or we know even we might think that we know. So one of the poems is about, the opening epigraph is Billy Collins, the plentiful imagery of the world needs to describe his love. And he uses all these different metaphors to talk about the person that he loves. But a part of the reason that metaphors are helpful is that it reminds us that even if you find the perfect metaphor that captures so much, the thing that you're describing is also still not that metaphor. It's still bigger than you can understand. It's still more fascinating, deeper. And so metaphors kind of give us if you want to put it in this way, an epistemological humility. They remind us that we can have words to speak about things. and that we need to because it's such a deep human need. But we also kind of sit with this posture of knowing that even the best poetic evocation of something is not exactly accurate. And I think that's something that maybe poets have on scientists, because I think sometimes there can be this confidence of that you can actually accurately say something with your words that exactly corresponds to things in reality. And we can say a lot of things and draw a lot of correspondences, but there's always this fragility, both of language and of human knowledge, that should invite us to kind of have a humble posture before people and things. And I think metaphors help us do that.
Yes. I mean, scientists probably aren't good at knowing when they're speaking in metaphor. I mean, like, you can talk about the laws of gravitation. And now I think I am paraphrasing C.S. Lewis from his book about 16th century literature, but he talks about, we can scoff at the idea that the apple falls to the ground because it's love that draws it, that sort of medieval notion. When it really turns out to be the law of gravity. But is it any less ridiculous to think the apple is a little citizen of of the world who understands the laws and obeys them? That's metaphorical language too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Another really helpful insight from. We haven't even gotten out of the introduction of your book, by the way. The introduction itself is fantastic. But I loved something you said, the way you described the value of metaphor as taking, we all have these deep, unutterable experiences that are really hard to put into words, that we don't even quite know how to say what we feel. And then a metaphor makes that concrete. Almost always the metaphor, not always, but almost always, the thing we're comparing this inchoate idea to is concrete. So I go from the abstract to the concrete. Now suddenly I can get my hands around something that I couldn't get my hands around before. That insight is so helpful. I've already touched on the idea that sometimes we think of figurative language, let's say, as decorative, ornamental, poetic. And by poetic, we somehow mean it floats away from the real world and off into some sort of poetic world. But the truth is, metaphor, poetry, figurative language brings things back to the world where we live and move and have our being. It gives a local habitation and a name, all that. So that wasn't a question. That was an opportunity for you to say some things.
No, yes, thank you for understanding what I meant to convey. I think I opened the book by talking about kind of my own discovery of a metaphor that helped give utterance to my kind of unutterable experience, which for me was, I'll let people read it, don't want to spoil it, but largely it's my own kind of lifelong struggle with not feeling like I belonged somewhere and wanting to be able to belong somewhere, but not knowing how to belong and trying to wrestle with all those questions that come and you're at that point in my early 20s and kind of stumbling upon a metaphor for that particular kind of pain, both kind of provided a relief because I was able to put words to that experience, but also in a funny way helped me have a posture of agency, because once I was able to put it into words and kind of imagine concrete aspects of it, I could strategize about what to do with that feeling. And I think that that's often something we struggle with, is with these things we can't put into words. We don't know how to act because we don't know how to speak about them. And so
Joy, I don't think it would be spoiling too much for you to tell us what this metaphor was. It is in the introduction. It's on about page 2. So
it's quite.
And so you're speaking in abstract terms, and your whole point is we're being concrete. Okay. So what do we got? What's your metaphor because you just all that abstraction you just gave. Now, what's the metaphor that brings that all to a concrete point?
So the metaphor was that I felt like a potted plant, and that was I had that thought while I used to live in this very old flat that it's funny, actually. I wrote about the flat in my last book at the last chapter, and then I wrote about the flat in the first book in my new book, which I didn't mean to do, but there's kind of a nice continuity in that.
Yeah.
But it's a very old flat, and it had all these pear trees that are St. Andrews pear trees, and supposedly they've been grafted in since like the 1500s. So they were some kind of.
Yeah.
And I just had this moment. I was moving again, and at that point, I had moved once a year for I think 10 years. But I'd been in that flat for 27 months. That was like a great feat. And I had this kind of moment of jealousy toward the trees, which would continue to grow and blossom and bear fruit and lose their leaves and do that over and over again, for time probably past my own lifetime. And I felt jealous that they had a place that they belonged. And I thought of my little potted plant that I kept all through through COVID, and I kind of kept it alive. I think I talk about this in the book as a kind of, token. It's like a little talisman. If I keep it alive, I could keep myself alive. And and it had started to look really scraggly, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to give it to somebody else or if I wanted to try to plant it. And then I thought, if I try to plant it, it'll probably just die. And then I thought, oh no, I think I'm like the little potted plant. I've been in my little pot. I've gone from place to place. I'm getting scraggly, like I've grown too much to stay in this pot.
Yeah.
But I'm frightened that if I just pick a spot in the garden and put my roots down, that I'll die of root shock, as you can sometimes do. And finding words for that kind of fear that I was always going to be portable, that I didn't have it in me to survive being rooted somewhere, was very sad, but it was also it was just a great relief. It helped me understand my condition. And of course, it's always good to keep in that brackets of I'm also not a potted plant, and I probably won't die if I stay somewhere. But that was the metaphor that kind of came to me sitting in my garden, that helped give me language for my feeling of rootlessness and my really deep desire to have a habitation and a place of belonging.
Yeah, that's such a great example of how figurative language, metaphor, is a form of concise language. Like when you try to describe all those feelings, it takes a lot of work. Too much. And then when you say, I am a potted plant, that contains so much. Now you can then unpack it and end up saying as many words as you started with, but still that's an anchoring idea for a person, for your own self, and also for anybody you're trying to communicate to. Such a great example of how metaphor, figurative language work. Okay. This is a warning to the listener. We're about to get a little technical and nerdy. As I was telling you before we started recording, Joy, I've never been able to get super interested in the distinction between simile and metaphor, right? I've known since I was in junior high that they're both a comparison, and a simile uses the word like or as, and a metaphor doesn't. My love is like a red, red rose is a simile. Life is a highway is a metaphor. And I know people care about that distinction. I never have. You do. So please make a case for why one should care about, why a writer especially should care about the different, doesn't have to be a writer, why a person should care about that distinction.
Well, for one, it's just fun to know things. So that's your first off.
Okay.
But I think my bid for why metaphor does matter, and I won't say it's superior to simile. I think they're doing different things. I think it's more existential because it is saying it uses the is language, right? It uses that ontological language. The reason I think it is important and it matters is it goes back to that kind of point earlier about how we have this tendency to think we have a grasp on things, right? To be able to kind of know and own and operate. And I think metaphor, if you use a simile, your lover is not a red, red rose. Like, that's fine. But that assumes that you know what your lover is, that you know for certain that your lover is not a red rose, and that you have kind of a confidence and an ownership of the knowledge of what the lover is. Whereas I think that metaphors, when you say is, and there's that bracketed is not, they're much more mysterious, and they're much more, they do a lot more to you. They require a lot more of you. And I think that they inculcate kind of an attitude, again, of humility, openness, and they invite further attention, because you have to be like, well, but that doesn't seem quite right. And so I think that they invite us into a posture of greater attention, because we have to notice where things depart. If I say my love is like a red rose, then I'm perfectly contented to notice that she has red cheeks and that she smells nice and carry on with my day. If I say she is a red rose, then I think, well, no, she's not. And then I have to think about why she's not. And then I start paying greater attention. And I realize that my love is a multifaceted being who my mind can never comprehend, and who is, constantly changing. So that's my pitch for why the difference matters.
Well, I have to say, that's a point well taken. Your title, if your title had been "You Are Like a Tree," that wouldn't have made much. That would have seem self-evident.
Yes.
The title, "You Are a Tree," not self-evident.
There you go.
Yeah.
It is literally more provocative, not just for the case of being productive, but because of that's what metaphors do to us.
Yeah. That's good. "You are like a tree" is literally true.
Yes.
Right? It's figurative language, but it is literal. I mean, there are ways that you're like a tree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm not quite as invested. The person who is uttering, making the utterance, "You are like a tree," is hedging his bets.
Yes.
The person who says, "You are a tree," is all in.
Yes.
And okay. All right. I'm going to do some thinking on that. I'm not ready to say I'm completely on the side of people who care about the difference, but you have definitely moved the ball down the field. Now I'm using sports metaphors. Can I just return for just a second to that language? I don't feel we might have given it short shrift. Your phrase you used of epistemological humility. Figurative language, you say, well, are we saying metaphor or figurative language more broadly contributes to epistemological humility? And that is the phrase you used, correct? Epistemological humility?
That is, yes.
Humility of the way we know of our confidence of how we know what we know.
Yes. Yes. I don't remember if I used it in the book. I think I might have, but yes. So humility about how we know what we know. I think there are probably ways in which figurative language in general could do that. I do think metaphor in particular does that, precisely because of that kind of the not nature, that it kind of, to put it in theology language, it kind of makes us do some apophatic, which is, you have apophatic is the way of saying things about God by negating things about God. So
immortal, invisible.
Yes, exactly.
Light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. All those knots, I think. And I think that metaphor has that kind of integrally inside of it. And so I think that in that way, metaphor does encourage a humility that maybe simile doesn't need to. And I guess another thing you could talk about, which I was too theologically scared to do too much with, but is analogy as well. Because analogy is kind of like I don't know, it relates to metaphor, but it's kind of more difficult. It's a little bit more abstract in some ways to parse.
Yeah. When you talked about epistemological humility a minute ago, and I think this is a point at which I lost track earlier and couldn't remember what I was thinking, but I think it was this. It's an important insight that people begin to understand. I don't think you have to spend a lot of time thinking about it to realize, oh, wait, we can only understand anything through figurative language. We don't have direct access to reality, to ultimate reality, the way, say, the angels do. Intellectus, I guess, is the language of how angels know things directly. They know things of God directly. we know things typically through some sort of figurative language. That's not an especially unusual insight. The insight that I picked up as you were talking about epistemological humility is that if we only know things through figurative language, or maybe I shouldn't say we only know them, but so much of our knowledge is metaphorical, analogical, even simile-ish, simileic. I don't know whatever the word is, whatever the adjective form of simile is. Well, the thing we know about all figurative language is it's not what we. The whole point of a comparison is it's not completely the same as the thing we're comparing it to. So we can only know through metaphor, simile, analogy, or a lot of what we know through those. And we're also conscious of how incomplete that kind of knowledge is. That our insights always have to be, our insights that come to us through figurative language are always tempered by the fact that my love is like a red, red rose, insofar as she has reddish cheeks and she smells good, but hopefully she doesn't have leaves or thorns. So
Yes.
I love it. That's super helpful. All right, Joy, we've spent a lot of time talking about the computer metaphor. Your whole point is there are better metaphors. There are other metaphors that we can think about ourselves. Let's just talk we don't have much time left, but tell us about the tree metaphor. Why is it helpful to think of ourselves as a tree? And I know that's not the only metaphor you explore in this book, but let's just, since we can't talk about all seven, let's talk about the tree.
So as I said, part of the reason I reached for that was I thought I want to look for metaphors that are enduring, that are kind of more ancient, that have somehow lasted through thousands of years. And humans as trees is one of those. And I think we also intuitively speak about humans as trees, even in our technological world, right? We talk about seasons of life. We talk about feeling rooted or uprooted or unrooted. We talk about someone being a late bloomer, which I guess could be a flower, but it could also be a tree. So we talk about having a fruitful season, but particularly, so I kind of chose that partially because of that, but largely because it's one of the most integrated metaphors all throughout Scripture of human beings and their kind of state of flourishing or not. And I think about that from Psalm 1, but it's also when you think about in John, when Jesus talks about being the vine, right? And the vine is a vine, but it is like a tree. It is functionally a tree, and Jesus is the true vine dresser. And so I kind of went to that metaphor to sit with it and think about what it offers us and in what ways humans are like trees and what that can open up for us. And specifically, I looked at in that chapter with Psalm 1. The idea, so it says, like a tree planted by streams of living water, which bears its fruit in season, and which does not wither, but all it does prospers. And so with that one, I talked about humans are planted. So there's a sense that what we are, most of it is under the soil. So much of what I experience in talking to you and what you experience in talking to me, there's something we can see, but there's a lot that you and I cannot see about each other that forms who we are, and that has been formed over all the years of our life. And so thinking about how humans, we don't get just compiled like a computer. We grow and are nourished. We're warped by things that hurt us over years and years. And so that's a way in which humans are like that. And so how does that invites us to approach people with mercy, with a sense of mystery, that there's so much of what they are that we can't see. And also with a sense kind of awe that many of us survive. There is kind of this wonder when you look at a tree that it survives, and it's just this kind of miraculous thing.
Yeah.
But also it's planted by streams of living water. So a lot of commentators say that is, it's not just like I live not too far from a burn, which is just like a stream. And there's all these very flourishing trees because they're by water. But it's not just that image that it's giving us. It's giving us the image of a tree in an orchard that has been planted by irrigated so that it has a source of water. And so the idea is that the flourishing one, the righteous one, the blessed person is like a tree that's tended to by God because it's nourished and it has all the water it needs. And so I spend some time thinking about what it means to be the kind of creature that needs to be nourished, and that doesn't just need to be nourished by one thing, right? So my computer, pretty much, if I like plug it in, it will be charged, right? It's hard to describe it as being nourished. And maybe I do a system update from time to time. But a tree doesn't just need you to pour in water. It also needs the right amount of sunlight. It needs to be pruned from time to time so it doesn't become overburdened. It needs birds to pluck off its fruit so it doesn't become overburdened. It needs all these kind of different, multifaceted kinds of nourishment. It needs other trees to send mycelium to its roots if it becomes, depleted. And so thinking about human flourishing as needing many different sources of nourishment. And when we see someone struggling, we don't just go, oh, you need a recharge, you need whatever that means. It means we go, what are the conditions of your flourishing? What is the environment that you're in, and why are you wilting? So that, again, is a more merciful and also gives you more agency, because if you're a computer and you break, that's it. If you're a human being and you're struggling a little bit, there are many things you can do to help a tree. And there's a great little section in Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing, where she talks about like the one redwood that survived in this particular section. And she was like, it's a really weird tree. It looks strange, but the reason it looks strange is because that's how it survived. So be a weird tree. And I think that is something that I find encouraging. And then finally, it bears its fruit in season. And that to me is about what a fruitful life is. And we don't bear fruit all the time. We don't turn out 500 words a day. There are seasons of fallow winter. It is very cold in Scotland right now, but that is a part of what brings the green of the summer. And so understanding ourselves as the kinds of creatures that have seasons, both in the sense of aging over the long period of life, but I also think you have lots of seasons. At least in my short life so far, I've had at least a couple winters and springs and falls. We have those over and over again. And so I think all of those images give us a lot more to think about what it is to flourish as a human being than the computer metaphor.
Yeah, especially that truth that the winter is not a failure on your part.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. That's so good. All right. We need to wrap this thing up. So I'm really interested to know, Joy, who are the writers who make you want to write?
So I'm sure I'll think of 10 more afterwards. But when you first asked me that question, you told me you were going to ask it.
That's right.
2 came to my mind. One is G.K. Chesterton. And I know that's a very basic cliche answer. And, the sophisticated grown-up part of me wants to be like, no, I've matured. But I remember when I read Chesterton, there's just a pleasure and a humor and a succinctness and a capacity to turn a completely winding, meandering essay into a punchline that I just think is so cool. Yeah. And then the other one that came to my mind was Elena Ferrante, who I don't know if you've had a chance to engage with her.
I just know the word. I know those words. Name. No, I know the name. Tell me about her.
So I just last year, actually, I finished the series while writing the book, but read the Neapolitan Quartet, and it follows the life of 2 young women who are kind of intellects and writers. So it could be a good thing to read for your listeners. Yeah. From like the 1950s in Italy and early 2000s, and they have this kind of fraught relationship of jealousy, and it's a lot about kind of like how we find safety in the world. So one of them kind of finds it through her intellect and her academic capacity to achieve, whereas the other one finds it through these kind of fraught relationships. But her writing is like, so the thing that makes me think of is eating potato chips, which I really like potato chips. And there's, if you eat a really salty potato chip, there's some way in which it almost hurts your mouth, but you also want to keep eating. Yeah. And then it creates a thirst in you. And that's what it feels like to read Ferrante. It's like, it's like painful, but also makes you want to keep reading. And she has the ability to do kind of like a a left jab with sudden plot twists that literally make you gasp. And all while also having kind of weird existentialist philosophy going on inside of it. So I just think, gosh, to be able to write like a bag of potato chips while also being an existentialist, that would be the best.
Bag of potato chip writing.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in my pipe and smoke it. I got to ask, was Secret Life of Trees part of your preparation for this book?
Yes. I'll make a confession, which was that I didn't read the whole book, but I think I actually quote Secret Life of Trees in the first chapter, talking about how they nourish each other.
Such a great book. Okay. Well, Joy Clarkson, I'm so glad to have met you. So glad you were here. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Thank you for the great conversation.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.